Hey friends, we're back with another episode of Seeking Our Spirit. Today we had my good friend, one of my best friends and closest colleagues in ministry, Christopher Hogin. Had a great conversation, great story, and hope you enjoy. If you want to ever be on the show or you're interested in spiritual direction, you can contact me at seekingourspirit@gmail.com.
Cool. All right, my friend. So we're rolling. Usually I do this later in the day with tequila, but since we're in the morning and we got coffee, I'll just
say will work. Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers.
So thanks for being willing to have this conversation with me.
Yeah. Thanks for asking, Brett.
Yeah, and looking forward to it. And I was joking but serious before we started recording that I did hesitate to ask you to have this conversation with me just because we have such a sort of friendship relationship and colleague relationship that I was like, I don't know if me and Hogin can like stay serious enough through this conversation.
Well, we've been serious before. It usually was followed by copious amounts of gin, and we got to that. We could get to that place every now and then. We get there
if we worked hard at it.
Yeah.
So why don't we start with just can you want to just give a brief, biography?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, when you ask me this question about some spiritual touch points in your life, it got me thinking about my whole family history. And I did not come from a religious family at all. If you look back in my whole family history, my dad, his people, for lack of a better word, grew up kind of in really rural West Tennessee. And his parents had absolutely nothing to do with religion or church, which was unusual in the 1940s and 50s.
So they didn't go at all. Your dad didn't grow up going to church.
No, Dad did not grow up going to church. Every now and then he would go to the Church of Christ because they had youth group on Sunday. And then on my mother's side, my grandfather, whom I never knew, he did start a small Episcopal church, and he would go by himself. But my grandmother was not a big churchgoer at all.
Yeah.
So it was kind of weird with both sets of parents. Church was not that huge in both of my parents' upbringing. So there was nothing that was really there. And I don't ever remember going to my grandparents. I don't think I ever went to church with my grandparents. Unless it was a funeral.
Yeah.
So, and now my parents, they went to church, and they made sure that we all went to church. But it was not the number one touch point in our lives.
So how did they start going to church?
So, again, this is the 1970s. Dad, my father, John Hogin.
You're old.
I am, yeah. And he started... He practiced law, and they were living in West Knoxville, and that's kind of what you did back then.
Yeah.
It was part of the culture. And so we started going to Church of the Ascension. My mother grew up Methodist, if you want to call it that.
Right.
And but they just decided to go to Church of the Ascension. And church was never that big in my dad's world, honestly. He used to make fun of it. One time the priest would be up there and reading his homily, and my dad pulled out a James Michener book and started reading Chesapeake. And he would always act up in church and try to get my brother and me to act up too. So it was just kind of a weird dynamic.
Huh.
And I say this because, and I don't know, your listeners don't know this, we're both priests.
Right.
And so there was no foundation or background. But the cool thing about my upbringing is that it was never discouraged or encouraged.
Mm-hmm.
It was just kind of, I was pretty much left to my own devices when it
just
came
was
to
neutral.
that.
But you guys But you grew up like involved in church, right?
I did. I was pretty involved, but I wanted to be. I was the kid who was waking up and he was just for whatever reason saying, I want to go to church. And people always talk about their personal relationship with God or with Christ or whatever. And that was never, there was never some flashpoint with me. It was always woven into my DNA. And I think my earliest memory would be as a child, I would wander out by myself in the woods. Mm-hmm. And God was kind of with me. It wasn't an imaginary playmate. Nothing like that.
Like, how old were you?
I was probably 4. Yeah, I was 4.
And you guys lived in?
We lived in Forest Brook at the time, which is in West Knoxville.
Where were the woods?
There actually were woods back then. Yeah. There was a cow pasture.
Oh, like beyond the neighborhood?
Yeah, beyond and then there was these perimeters. And you go in the woods and you could usually find penthouses that were thrown back in there. I'm not even lying.
That's such an 80s.
Yeah, penthouses or Playboys or... I mean, you literally would go fishing for that as a kid, and probably.
Yeah.
I mean, the 70s, that was a nasty decade. Just a nasty decade.
We could do a whole other podcast
all the way around.
I remember this is total, we shouldn't go this way, but I remember the same thing, wandering, there was an abandoned, like, shack in between Bennington and I guess Brentmore, whatever the next neighborhood was. There was land. Mm-hmm. And there was an abandoned shack, like home there, and the same thing. That's what you would wander back there, and there'd be like magazines.
Oh, we could have a whole other podcast with this.
Anyway,
because
all right, this got derailed.
Yeah,
no, I'm not kidding. But before you jump into that, I just want to just brief Christopher Hogin grows up in Knoxville, goes to school, becomes lawyer. What's your just?
Oh, sure. So my background is this. And I'll try to keep this brief, but
yeah, just a summary.
I grew up in Knoxville, and oddly enough, when I was in 3rd grade, I was diagnosed as having a significant learning disability, and I only found this out recently. But my mother revealed to me that the school system wanted me to put me into an adaptive center.
Oh wow!
Yeah. Take me out of the school system. So, and I'll come back to that because that was a pretty big touch point in my relationship, in my faith with God.
Yeah.
That was what was really kind of sustained me at that point. But, so I kind of just glided through school. I didn't care. And then went to University of Tennessee, barely got into University of Tennessee. And then once I was in University of Tennessee, I just kind of knocked the top off with grades because I was finally left alone to do my own devices. And then I got into law school. And after I got into law school, before I got into law school, my father died. He died at 49, and our family was left penniless for the most part. There was no life insurance. There was massive debt. And so that was another sort of touch point in my own faith journey.
You were at UT law school?
I had just graduated from UT undergrad. It was the summer before I was about to go. I was going to be a teacher. And I was going to go to the University of Memphis, become a teacher. And then as I was driving to Memphis, I got a call from my mother. That was one of my graduation presents, was the cell phone, the massive brick cell phone.
Yeah.
And she told me that my dad had died. And so I went back. And I spent a year of substitute teaching, studied for the law school exam, and decided to just forget teaching.
I didn't know you taught ever.
And
where were you teaching?
I was teaching all over. I was Northwest Middle School. I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah.
And
so here in Knoxville.
Here in Knoxville.
And then where was law school?
Tennessee.
Okay.
So I went to University of Tennessee for 3 years.
Okay.
Not a great experience.
Yeah.
Just simply because I probably wasn't built for that industry. And I graduated in 1999, had no desire to have a law job.
Yeah.
None at all. But I kept I was gravitating towards the church. That summer I was living in the Tyson House, which is on the University of Tennessee campus. I took the law school, the bar exam while I was living at the Tyson House. And I don't know if it was a kind of a midlife crisis at 27, but I kind of had one where I think I'm tired of Knoxville. I'm tired of looking for a career. I just wanted to drop out for a while. And of all places that I'd wanted to visit, most people go to California or someplace. I wanted to go to Vermont.
Yeah.
So I packed up my 1999 Saturn SL2.
Nice.
And it was a stick shift. It was great. and drove from Knoxville to Vermont. And my brother knew one person up there in Burlington, and she was going to let me stay in her place. But I didn't know anybody. I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I would camp out sometimes when I was driving. It took me 3 days to go up there.
Yeah.
And I remember wondering, I was like, God, what am I doing? This makes absolutely no sense. And one night I was in upstate New York in some flea bag hotel, right before I was about to cross the Vermont border. And I had this vision of Abraham, of God calling Abraham and saying, you got to wander.
Huh.
And it was a pretty powerful moment. And it was sustaining, but it wasn't dramatic. It was a placeholder that kind of kept me grounded.
Yeah. So, okay, so I'm going to take note of all these little places. We'll have to come back to them. But so you go to Vermont just to get your head straight. And how long are you there?
So I go to Vermont to get my head straight, but I had written some letters to churches all throughout the Vermont area. And I was hoping to live in Vermont for 3 months to do work on the side.
Yeah.
And
law
then
work? Mm-hmm. Law?
No. I was going to just work to earn my money.
Yeah.
And then I was going to write about my experience being a learning disabled kid in the school system. I ended up being a college scholar at UT. It's an honors program. Yeah. And my advisor, Jack Reese, was fascinated. It was like, your grades are off the top.
Yeah.
Because you clearly were misdiagnosed. I think what I want your senior project to be is to write a narrative about what it was like being in the school system as a resource kid. And
I didn't know that. Did you ever write that?
I did, and he wanted me to publish it, and I've thought about going back to it.
Yeah, dude, that would be fascinating.
I never did, so
you should. That would be great.
Well, in May, but that was what I was going to do. Is I was going to work on the book to kind of continue it on. But what happened is when I was up in Vermont and I was wandering around Burlington for 2 weeks, and it was so easy. It was so easy to get jobs up there.
Yeah.
Because I was so countercultural up in Burlington, Vermont. When I would go to a job interview, I would wear a suit and was polite.
Yeah.
And wasn't high. And people, it blew their minds. I think I had 3 or 4 job offers.
Yes, sir, yes, ma'am, yeah.
And they just had never seen anything like this before. And so, but I didn't accept a job for some reason because I was kind of hoping to work in a church. And then I was about to throw in the towel. I was going to move back to Knoxville. And I got an email from a woman in Middlebury, Vermont named Catherine Nichols, who's still my mentor today. She's a priest in this idyllic town, Middlebury, Vermont, college town. You couldn't have had a better place to land.
Huh.
And she said, I noticed that you have experience working with youth because I was a youth minister while I was in law school at Church of the Ascension for the kids in the neighborhood, for underprivileged kids. We called it Lions View Teens. I knew all the neighborhood and did it for 3 years on Sunday nights. We would just have the kids in the neighborhood have their own separate youth group.
Huh.
And we had a great time. I still keep in touch with some of them.
Yeah.
So I ended up being the youth minister at St. Stephen's in Middlebury, Vermont. And then she found me a place to live. There was a woman who owned this mansion in Ripton, Vermont, who was from Chattanooga, Tennessee. She was 74, and we ended up becoming best friends.
Huh.
She was outstanding. And so it was a really idyllic 3 months. I look at my time in Vermont, those 3 months, as a period of healing from everything with my father's death to what I had experienced in school, to just not knowing what to do in life. And those 3 months was just, it was an amazing experience.
So from there, how did you end up, okay, then you went into law, or you went and worked in Congress?
Well, this is where the story gets interesting. So Catherine looks at me and she says, Christopher, you're called to be a priest. And like, you get along with everyone.
Yeah.
Like, you get along with the kids. And I said, well, I kind of had to. That was the benefit of being a learning disabled kid in resource.
Right.
And she said, yeah, I think you're called to be a priest. And I want you to stay up here and go through the ordination process, to go through the discernment process.
Yeah.
And something just didn't sit right about that.
Yeah.
So, oddly enough, I passed the bar exam. I passed the Tennessee bar exam. So, I didn't do anything about that. I thought, that's great. And I stayed up in Vermont. And then I got another letter that said, if you don't get sworn in, it's going to be more complicated.
Uh-huh.
So I left around December. I drove back to Knoxville. And every intention of moving back up to Vermont. And while I was got sworn in, and I had a month to go before I head back to Vermont. It's the Christmas break, and I needed money. So I signed up with a temp agency. My sister worked for a temp agency. And I remember she came back. She said, Christopher, we got a job for you. You can hand out jelly samples in the mall in a cart. And I thought, yeah, I'm good. I think I'm gonna hold off on that. Like pepper jelly and cheese on a cracker. Oh, Christopher, you're doing a good. Law school went great for you, didn't it? And then the next call was, there's a congressman, and they need somebody to just sit in his office, in his local office in Oak Ridge. His name is Congressman Zach Wamp. Would you be interested? Yeah. I mean, I actually get to dress up and put on a suit. So I went to Zach Wamp's office, and the first day I was there, the person left, and I was running the office by myself.
Oh, wow.
The chief of staff had gone back to D.C. The other person had kind of left. So I was a temp, but I worked well with constituents.
Yeah, yeah.
And the chief of staff noticed it, and she was like, we could use you up in D.C. So they offered me a job in D.C. So I have, on one hand, I always say I have an opportunity to go back to the Garden of Eden up in Vermont and pursue a career of honor, or go to Sodom and Gomorrah, which would be Washington, D.C., and live a life of debauchery. And, of course, I chose the latter. But the cool thing was I was good friends with Bishop Tharp at the time, and he took me out for a beer, and I told him my dilemma.
Yeah.
And he said something really interesting to me. It's great, Bishop. He said, if you're really called to the priesthood, it's not going to go away.
Right.
He goes, do what you want to do. If you want to go to Washington, D.C. and live a just wild life, you do it. And he said, don't even go to church for a while.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really interesting advice.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And so, but he was kind and supportive. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I did. I went to Washington, D.C. and was there for the next 10 years and lived the D.C. life.
Yeah,
I mean, it was not a church life at all.
Yeah.
But I could never not go to church.
Yeah.
And I didn't see... I had to be there. Yeah. That faith was still very, very important. Yeah. And so...
Well, so that... Okay. And I'm going to work my way back through some of this, but so up there... Now, didn't you had some other job too, right? Before you went into priesthood. Did you not? Didn't you work for
Well, yeah. So I ended up... Are you talking about... So in D.C.
Yeah.
I worked for Zach Want for 9 months, and then ended up, again, I mean, just amazing things have happened in my life that just happened.
Picking up on that.
And one of them was becoming a counsel for Senator Pat Roberts.
Okay.
So, 9 months, I'm organizing games for middle school and elementary school students in Vermont. Yeah. And then 9 months later, I'm working on, or a year later, I'm working on legislation for a senator.
That's crazy.
So I became his counsel.
Yeah.
And
with all that background, like you said, of learning disabled or whatever.
Oh, yeah. I mean, crazy. I literally, at that point, when I got my offer letter from the senator, I wanted to trace a big middle finger and send it to all, the Knox County schools.
Dude, what a great story. So you move to that position, and then Is that all your time in DC? Do you have any
No,
other
no, no, no,
positions?
no. I spent, and it was it was an intellectual narcotic up there. And Senator Pat Roberts, he was not only way ahead of his time. I mean, he actually predicted a 9/11 scenario happening in this country about a year before it occurred. He was also a very kind human being, and it was a wonderful staff. And I'm still close to many of the staff today. A few people are just my dear friends that I keep in touch with still. But like every other staffer in D.C., I wanted to be a member of Congress myself. I thought, oh, I can do this.
Yeah.
But the only way you can become a member of Congress is if you go back to your home and you work in a field. So I got a call from a person, from an attorney in Knoxville, who actually we both know. I'm not going to mention his name because he was a parishioner at Ascension, and he offered me a job in Knoxville.
Yeah.
So I said, yeah, I'll take it. I'll become a trial attorney. And so I resigned my position at the Senate. They asked me to stay on for 2 months so they could hire someone and transition and me train that person. And so, but there was something that just didn't feel right. I didn't want to leave D.C., but I knew I wanted to be a member of Congress and all of that good stuff.
Yeah.
So, the week before I was about to leave the office, I got a call from Knoxville, and they said, well, you don't have a job anymore. I'm sorry.
Huh.
So I didn't have a job in the Senate.
And you didn't have a job.
I didn't have a job in Knoxville.
Yeah.
And so using my lawyering background, I said, well, what are we going to do about this? So we reached a settlement based on a contract dispute, and I was able to get enough money to buy a condo, or put a down payment on a condo in Alexandria. And former Navy captain who worked in Senator Roberts' office became the COO of the American Red Cross.
Okay,
And he hired me on as the COO of the American Red Cross.
Or the person you bought the condo from?
No. I bought a condo.
Yeah.
And then I didn't have a job, but I had a condo.
Yeah.
And I was just going to stay in D.C. And then the retired Navy captain, submarine captain, became the COO of the American Red Cross.
Yeah. How did you connect with them?
I worked with him in Senator Roberts'
office.
got
it. Okay.
And he offered me, he knew I needed a job, and so he kindly just sort of gave me a job as an operations manager at the Red Cross.
Okay.
So I was there for a year. Hated it. I loved my boss, but the work, I was so ill-suited for the work. It was very bureaucratic.
Yeah.
And I just wasn't, it just wasn't the right fit.
Yeah.
And so about a year into that, I kind of had this ministry calling still. Mm-hmm. And I thought, you know what I want to do? I want to become a guardian ad litem. I want to work for abused and neglect kids. That you could make a pretty good industry being a guardian ad litem. And so I was going to go into child advocacy. I'd studied that in law school. And so I quit my job at the Red Cross. I waved into the D.C. bar and actually got a job with the D.C. government as a mediator for child abuse and neglect cases. Mm-hmm. Problem was they don't pay you. Mm. So I wasn't making any money, but I had enough saved. So again, I'm without a job, and what did I do? I go to Italy for 4 months. Or not 4 months, 4 weeks. And met up with a buddy of mine who was over there and drank a lot for 4 weeks in Italy. And I just wandered around Italy and Austria. And was kind of like, but that was another sort of spiritual moment. I'm talking to God and mm-hmm. keeping in my journal and, wonder what's going on. I'm in my 30s here. Come back to Knoxville and I don't have any money, or come back to D.C. I don't have any money. I had about enough for my rent. So I go to Atlantic City when I come back and I bet my mortgage
Did you really?
On the craps table and made enough money to pay my mortgage for the next 3 months.
What?
Yeah. It's in Atlantic City.
How did you get that? You were just like, let's just.
So my buddies, I came back and my buddies were like, hey, let's go to Atlantic City. I was like, I don't have a job. I don't have. Oh, that sounds like a great
Might as well,
idea.
yeah.
So I went to Atlantic City, and I gambled. My I literally had enough money to pay for 1 month left.
That's so good.
And but once I got it,
Yeah.
I was like, that's it. I'm done. I walked up, left the casino, and went to bed. And here's an interesting thing. Fast forward many years later, I ended up getting I had solid income. Mm-hmm. I went back to Atlantic City. This would have been in 2006. I lost everything. So I felt like I was paying it back.
Yeah.
Like it was even. And I wasn't upset. I was like, that's okay.
Yeah.
I remember I lost it all on the roulette table with this, mousy, pretty little roller, or
whatever you call it.
Whatever you call them. So, here it is. It's DC, and I make enough money. This is in 2003, and I'm just kind of limping along at this point. And then I find out there's temp work for attorneys. You can go in and do document review. And so there's a firm called Howery, Simon, Arnold, and White, and I was one of 300 attorneys. It was like a sweatshop. Mm-hmm. We were in this big room, and we were just going through documents. And I can remember thinking, this is the easiest job in the world. Mm-hmm. But everybody around me they were cheating on their timesheets. They were getting up and leaving, and you had a certain amount of documents to review every day. Mm-hmm. And they were just gaming the system. And I'm like, this is so easy. Huh. And I was so glad to have a job.
Yeah.
So I wasn't anything great. I just did my work.
Yeah.
And little by little, they kept firing people. They kept filtering people out. So 150, it was from 300 to 150, and it was whittling down. And eventually there was I made the last 20. Mm-hmm. And then they ended up hiring full time 3 people. And I was one of the 3 people they hired.
And you were there for how long?
Almost 6 or 7 years.
Okay.
And I became a manager. I started leading up production projects. I would work with a team, and then I would work with contract attorneys to meet Department of Justice requests for antitrust suits.
Okay.
So
you were in D.C. for 16?
10 years.
Oh, this was within that 10 years.
Yeah, it's within that 10 years.
So then what, and I sort of know the story of you start to feel called, but in terms of talking with, there was a priest in D.C. area or something, but how did you, so is that your last career in?
Yeah, pretty much in D.C., but here's the weird thing. So I would be billing sometimes 90 hours a week, and but one thing that I was committed to was, number one, going to church, and then doing Wednesday night, this program. And I kept getting more and more involved in it and taking on leadership roles just because I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I started teaching classes, and then when there were small groups,
This is a church in Alexandria?
Yeah, Christ Church.
That's right. Okay.
And so, and I just got more and more involved, and I talked about the discernment throughout all. I talked to a priest, and I was hoping, I didn't want to be called to the priesthood. Did not want to be called. I wanted my calling to be a rich attorney, and then I could just give the money back. Right. But
it kept bugging you.
Bishop Tharp's right. Just that tapping. That tapping.
So how did you get to North Carolina from there?
Well, so what really happened, I was in a fantastic relationship, and I was dating a flight attendant. It was just great. We had a blast, but I had shared with her that I kind of wanted to be a priest someday, and that didn't fly with her.
Oh, so you then turned the corner on that.
I was going to get more serious into that.
Yeah.
And to her credit, she was very honest. She was like, you know what, that's just not what I want.
Yeah.
And so we broke up, but it was fine. It was okay. And this would have been in October of 2009. And then a priest in Alexandria at the Christ Church, she was about my age, she comes up to me and she said this. She goes, Christopher, when are you going to quit dicking around and take this call seriously? Her name was Erica Tack, and she's amazing. And she said, I just want to help you through this process. Just try it.
Yeah.
So I went through the discernment process, hoping they would turn me down.
Yeah.
But,
dude, I don't know that I've ever put this together, but did she go to VTS?
yeah.
Because I never put the time. I know that story, but I've never put the timeline together. Because she would have been maybe 2 years out of VTS.
Right.
I know. I went to school with her.
So they had I knew probably
Erica,
know
and her husband was a priest.
Well, maybe her first husband was. She married a second. She was divorced by the time I knew her.
I'm gonna have to look that up sometime. I'm pretty
we
sure
probably
we went
know
to
a
school
lot
together.
of the same people because Christ Church, they had like 6 seminarians
right,
there.
Right. No, but I just now anyway. Don't want to derail.
Right.
But I put it together that I think I went to school with her. But anyway, so she says that to you, and you start taking it seriously.
Right. Well, and then don't tell too many people this, but I'd had a really big Friday night once, and I woke up and just didn't feel great. And I was in Georgetown. I ended up in Georgetown, and I just kind of wandered the streets of Georgetown. It was on a fall October morning. It was a beautiful day, and it was cool. And I just thought to and there truly was something holy at that moment, and the message was kind of felt to me that this is your last chance. This is your last chance. If not, the opportunity will not open up again.
And that's just the sense,
Just a
an
feeling,
internal sense.
Well, I'd also had a dream about that one night too. I woke up in the middle of the night, and so I called Erica the next day, and I said, "Okay, let's try this." And I was hoping I could just say, "God, I tried it, and it didn't work. The community didn't want me to. I mean, I've not lived a priestly life, and I'm not ashamed of that. Just so you know." And so, but I went through it, and it was a really holy moment. The discernment committee, we really bonded. It truly felt like what a discernment committee was meant to be. And then for those of you who don't know, a discernment committee is when you want to go into the priesthood, you're connected with parishioners, and then you have backup support with clergy and the diocese, and you discern collectively, when it works well, whether a person is called to the priesthood. So, and it was powerful.
You go through that at Christ Church?
I went through that at Christ Church, and it was spiritually meaningful for the people on the committee as well. Not so much it was all about Christopher Hogin, but they were able to reflect on their own
that's the way it's
understanding of what a priest is,
or their own call,
and their own call, and their own ministry. I mean, there were just really powerful moments.
So you go through that.
Yeah.
You get the stamp to go to seminary.
I get the stamp to go to seminary.
And you choose. That's what took you to North Carolina. You choose
well,
to go to
no,
Duke.
I actually chose to go to Yale at first. I applied to Yale and got in. And again, this is my, the chip on my shoulder being a resource kid.
Right.
And like, I'm going to go to Yale. Yeah, I'll send another, middle finger letter to the school psychologists and everything else.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go to Yale, so I even got a scholarship there.
Yeah.
But I went there, and it just didn't feel right. It didn't resonate with me. And the Diocese of Virginia was one of the few places that allowed seminarians to go to Duke for 3 years. You didn't have to go a fourth year.
Yeah.
So I checked out Duke, and there was just something about it that felt right.
Yeah.
And so I'd already paid a deposit down at Yale, and I think I lost $2,000 to go to Duke instead. And they gave me a scholarship also. So
you do seminary in Duke, and then when you're done with seminary, you get released from the Diocese of Virginia and you stay in North Carolina.
Yeah, well, I was still under the authority. I'd never actually changed. I was still connected to the Diocese of Virginia.
Oh, okay.
So,
but you stayed after seminary. You served.
Yeah,
in North Carolina.
I did.
And then
St. Michael's Episcopal Church.
And that was how many years?
Phenomenal, 3 years.
And then that's when you came.
Yeah. That was, and again, that's a whole other story too, how that happened.
Yeah.
But
okay, all right. So, okay. So I want to go back now through a bunch of that really. So we sort of have like threaded in your story. You know, you've named these touch points of like spiritual moments, or yeah, I would say that inbreaking of spirit or whatever. But so take me back to like you started talking about, which is very interesting to me, like no real intentional upbringing in church or with religion or spirituality, let's say.
Right.
And yet you, from a very young age, you named like you had a sense of something higher. You would go walk in the woods or whatever. And is that the earliest
that was my
thing you remember?
communing with, yes. I
and
loved being alone.
You remember being that young and
yes.
like actually feeling some sort of connection to something.
I don't ever remember not praying.
Wow, that's
I don't ever remember not praying.
Yeah.
And
we have very similar.
Yeah, and actually, I used to.
That way.
I mean, I would play priest by myself.
Yeah.
At 4, and I would just break bread and have Dixie cups. I mean, I wasn't trying to be disrespectful. It was more of I was fascinated by the whole by the sacraments. And let me be clear.
So you liked church?
I did, and my parents they went to church and they were supportive, and especially my mother. So I'm not saying that they.
Right.
It just.
But it wasn't like we pray together at home, or
sometimes we would,
yeah.
But it was just not the centerpiece.
Yeah. Okay. So interesting as a child. So what else? What else do you remember from there? I mean, part of what I'm picking up on, and something that I see as I do these interviews is, I call them languages, like the different languages or ways that God sort of talks to people, and everybody has like. Yeah. And it's interesting to see how people sort of learn what that language is in their life. And it's different for people. And some people have more than one, you know, but for you, it just really, it much like mine, seems to just be this abiding sense that's always been there. And it's a feel. And it even plays out in your story of just like, just opportunities coming and you falling into things and doors opening and, so I don't want to put words
just
in your mouth, but that's what it sounds like.
No, you're precisely right. I mean, just and for lack of a better word, I mean miracles in many ways, and whether intentional or not, but there was always kind of a pushing back on it. There was kind of a fighting back.
Oh, yeah.
Not. It just sometimes I think it would just be easier selling insurance.
Yeah. Sure.
Be clearer.
So. Okay, so take me from that, from being real young, playing priest, walking with God in the woods. What else would you point to?
Well, you would talk. So you talk about your language, what these languages, these spiritual languages, I think is what you're mentioning. And I just thought of this, but that alone time, which I was never alone, I always felt the presence of God, always, and praying at night. But stories were very important to me. Very, very important. And I would often listen to those long playing records, but I was obsessed with the Bible story records. And
as a child,
you know, 4 years old, and even now I can still remember those narrations of different biblical stories as a child, but they were kind of woven in to my consciousness, and that gave me a lens of how to see and interact and engage with the world. And I've oftentimes, every time I've made a mistake, I've kind of connected it to a story within my childhood.
That's not to derail us and get like Episcopal dorky, but like that what you just described in my mind is sort of like what liturgical church is aiming at, right? We walk through this story, we live through this story again and again and again every year, right? And it sort of gets woven into us, and it shapes and frames the way we experience the world.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. So okay. So take me later. I mean, what sort of touch points would you name in your growing up life?
Yeah, probably the next touch point would be the academic troubles that I had. Yeah. And they pretty much started around. The first signals happened in first grade, and then they just intensified until by the time I was in third grade, everything had sort of collapsed at that point. oddly enough, reading was never a problem for me. I was actually probably above grade level when it came to reading. Writing was atrocious. Following directions was atrocious. My mind wandered.
Yeah, yeah.
And math, I was basically illiterate in math. Mm-hmm. But I attribute part of that, in looking back, I probably would have done well in a Montessori school, or not very good being micromanaged. That was just my personality, even though I was not a behavior problem.
Yeah. So that struggle, you would name it.
Yeah, there was a pretty bad struggle, and I was taken out of class quite a bit, and went through a battery of tests, and they wanted to either hold me back, which was a badge of shame back then, or two, they wanted to put me in, an adaptive center for, children with very limited cognitive abilities, to put it mildly.
Jeez.
So my mother pushed back and said no. So basically, I was in a resource class most of the time, which is, in 1981.
It's not like it is now.
You're kind of a target at that point.
Yeah.
And so I guess today people would call it bullying. I never, even today, I don't look at it as bullying. I just think the pack sees a weakness and they pounce on it. Yeah. And I kind of learned to fight back in many ways. But here's the gift in all this, and I truly found a lot of gifts, is that I got to be friends with kids that were so beyond the world I knew.
Yeah.
I mean, I got to be buddies, good friends with kids from really rough backgrounds. I mean, this is a West Knox kid who doesn't get to be in like the smart class. This is not that bad.
Right, right.
Maybe it's shameful, but it's not like I was being abused or anything of that caliber.
But you probably had to do a lot to get to have like the healthy perspective you have on it now. You probably had to do a lot of like processing.
I did, but I did make pretty good. I cultivated some pretty good friendships, and they taught me a lot. These kids taught me a ton. The odd thing about the whole resource is that I learned nothing at that point. Now, I had a wonderful resource teacher, but at that point, I just gave up.
Yeah,
I didn't care.
Didn't matter.
And so it was that would be my institutional.
Were you in that situation all through high school?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I went through middle school.
So did you have a rough time socially with the pack, right, even all through high school?
I figured out how to navigate that. I don't know how I did it, because I ended up becoming class president in high school.
Wow.
And so I don't know how that happened, but I do remember in middle school, I had to get special dispensation to take a foreign language, because if you were in a resource, your grades didn't count if you were in a resource. I remember one time I'd made second honors, and that was qualified me for the honor society. Mm-hmm. And they said, no, you're in resource, and that doesn't count for the honor society.
Wow.
So I got pushed out. I couldn't join the honor society.
No, you're not allowed to do well.
So, I mean, I like had second honors, I think like A's and B's. Yeah. And I remember showing the advisor, hey, I'm ready to go, ready to sign up.
Yeah.
Oh, well, those are resource grades, and we don't allow that. And and again, I mean, it's okay.
Yeah.
And I learned from it. But and again, I have to go back. And there were some amazing teachers that I had. Mm-hmm. In fact, this is what blew my mind. One of my favorite resource teachers, her name was Julia Black. She believed in me, and she said, I don't want this. And I found out later, and I'll tell you when I found out this later, I did not want the system to eat him alive, and I knew he would. Mm. And so she never felt sorry for me. She pushed me, and, you're not trying. And she would hold me accountable. Mm. Here's the weird thing. I become a priest. Many years down the road, I get a call from one of my other middle school teachers, Julia Black. She was a teacher in middle school. Could you go see her? So I see my middle school teacher, and we talk. And she's on her deathbed.
Yeah.
And she said, that's when she told me. I said, I didn't want the system to eat you up.
Yeah.
She remembered me.
Wow.
And I ended up giving her last rites. and I did her funeral.
How did
This
that
just
even
happened.
happen? Was she Episcopalian?
No, she's Baptist.
How did you get the call?
So Carolyn Montgomery, who's a parishioner at Ascension, she had a really strong network of friends, and every now and then she calls me to see if I could minister to one of her friends. And Julia Black was one of her friends.
Wow.
So I happened to be up at UT Hospital, and so I get a call.
Yeah, yeah.
And
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, what a beautiful.
I mean, I have a picture on my phone of the two of us.
Wow.
And it's, but it gave me a chance to thank her.
Yeah, yeah.
And, I just wouldn't be where I was without
Yeah.
those people in my life.
Yeah, people who get put there, right? Like, that's just crazy to. Even that, right? Like, exactly. Like, what would life be like if you didn't have this person that, like, pushed you,
Oh my
and
gosh,
took that?
yes.
Yeah.
Didn't feel sorry for me. And,
Right.
you get, people do feel sorry for you a lot of times. Like, when I was in third grade, the teacher gave me a note to take to the office. And while I was going to the office, she was well-intentioned, but she basically told the class to be nice to me because I wasn't very smart, basically. And so, which is like throwing raw meat to tigers.
That's the wrong thing to say. Yeah.
So basically, while I'm gone, she was telling me, Christopher, he's in the different class from time to time.
Yeah.
I found out, of course, I found out on the playground.
Yeah, yeah. Dude, what a story though. Just to like you do need to go write that book, and I mean like to then what you became and what you accomplished and all the things you did. That's awesome.
Well, it's grace, and this is, I believe in all of this. I think you and we're both. I think we're both pretty grounded as priests. We're fairly grounded, and we have both. I think this is why we get along so well. Is that not only are we grounded, but we have also kind of lived within the surface of the world, and don't have a problem with that. But try to see the spirituality in that rather than trying to push back or fight against it. So what I'm trying to say is I believe in all of this.
Yeah, yeah. So I just want to make sure we go through and so touch point. So anything else in that age range you want to name of like spiritual moments that you would call them touch points?
Yeah.
Or you want to move into like later life?
Probably later. There were a pretty significant. There was a illness in my immediate family when I was a serious illness when I was a freshman, and this person in my family became seriously ill and had to go be hospitalized for a while. But that'll be for another day.
Yeah. Okay. So and then beyond that.
My father
died not long after that.
My dad died at 49, and that was another spiritual moment. I was driving to Memphis, and of course I get a call from my mom on the brick phone, and she said, and she sounded odd, and I said, "Hey, where's Dad?" "He's here." At that point, I knew it happened.
Oh wow!
And I pulled over. I was in a field. I just got off the interstate and went to a field, and it was a gorgeous day. And she told me about my dad dying. I said, okay. We talked. I hung up the phone, and I just wandered out in the field and had a conversation with God. And I said, okay, God, it was almost like I knew this was going to happen. I was like, okay, I'm ready. Let's do this. Help me figure this out, God. Let's do this. And so,
because of other circumstances, you sort of had to be like.
Yeah, I kind of knew what his financial situation was, and the odd thing, 2 weeks before he died, he walked me through his practice, all his cases, showed me where the money was hidden, the cash was hidden in the office, and so that's how I dealt with it. I was 22, and there was nobody to run his practice, and so I had to close the operations down in his practice, which was and deal with the IRS and deal with creditors and attorneys coming in trying to steal the cases, but again, it all worked out, and I got to emphasize
for a resource kid,
Right. But and I have to emphasize, there were far more positive influences, positive people than there were the negatives.
Yeah, yeah.
And there were so many people in the community of Knoxville that that supported us and helped us and loved us. So, it worked out.
That's at the time period where you were going to law school, or no?
No, I was going to go to become a teacher in Memphis.
That's when you were
I was going to become a teacher.
Got it. Okay.
And I was going to go to grad school to get my teaching master's in education in Memphis.
So, okay. So what else? Just touch points.
Well, I mean, those are a lot of the major some later touch points, but and I think most people have these touch points, and I feel like God is just kind of waiting in the wings, one way or the other, and that's when you go to God to kind of help you get the strength to navigate.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've always said, God does communicate to us through prayer, but what God will do to us in prayer is give us clarity to see the options before us so that we can make better decisions.
Yeah, what interests me, though, too, is I agree, you're right, people have these touch points, people have these experiences, but oftentimes, what's different about you, and again, it's very similar to my story, but oftentimes these touch points, whether it's Richard Rohr has some great statement about finding God in great moments of joy and great moments of pain, right?
Right, absolutely.
And so those oftentimes are moments where people sort of have that inbreaking of the Spirit, where out of necessity almost they turn to God. But the difference in your story is that turning to God had always been there.
Absolutely.
So it wasn't like, oh, my dad dies, I'm in tragedy, and I turn to God out of necessity. You always had that.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Which is interesting.
And I view that as a gift, not as anything. And that's kind of where grace comes in. I view that as a gift, and hopefully as sort of a larger purpose. That God sort of uses people in many ways to fulfill whatever God's ultimate plan is.
Mm-hmm. And I
could say the same with you too, because I think you look at us and how we act and interact. It's just it's not, we don't fit the priest mold. I don't think.
Yeah. The other thing about that I find interesting is I don't know if you would echo this, or if this resonates with you, but I thought my whole life that that's what everybody experienced always. Yeah. It wasn't until actually in the ministry, in talking to people about their spirituality and stuff, only then did I realize people haven't always, everyone doesn't just walk around from the time they were a child with this clear sense of God.
Right.
Well,
the fact of atheism just didn't comprehend.
Oh yeah, sure.
And it wasn't a judgment thing.
No.
It was just like
fathom.
I don't. It's like, how can you go through the day without drinking water?
Yeah. Yeah.
That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
It's like not eating food or not drinking water.
Yeah.
I do want to use. This is sort of a kind of a light spiritual touch point, but I want to kind of give the opposite perspective. So, when I was growing up, I loved being involved in church activities, but the Episcopal Church was never great, at least during my time with youth activities, and so I went to a lot of evangelical and charismatic faiths. I did the Young Life. I did youth groups with other more charismatic churches here in the area. And for some reason, that never resonated with me.
Interesting. Yeah.
I can remember going away on a camp one time, and this was about accepting Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. And everything that the messages that were being presented to me, I felt like an alien. I said, what is this?
Yeah.
And it never resonated. So even on the sort of the religious side, that didn't resonate with me either. That certain brand of communicating religion and theology, I couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
What I did do was I would just walk off by myself. You're supposed to be in Bible study, you're supposed to be in deep study with the Bible, and I just walked off by myself into the woods.
Yeah.
And or being dropped off in a shopping mall and told to witness to people.
Yeah, yeah. Has nature been? I mean, you've mentioned nature a couple times. Walking in the woods, has nature been sort of
So I think nature
a
is
language of spirituality?
it is a language of spirituality, but I think it's only a piece.
Yeah.
And I always have to emphasize this. I think there are many different pieces and building blocks. Church is also being in community. And what I love about the Episcopal faith is that I find my prayer more intentional and deeper when I'm in community with others. And it happens, after taking communion and then going back and being in deep prayer. On a practical level, I try to tell, it's like being in the gym. You tend to work out harder when you're in a gym with other people. And it's not like you're trying to one up someone. But I find I have deeper, more intentional prayer in community. But I think it goes along with those moments where you can have one-on-one with God. I don't think you can have one with the other. That's why I always push back on my church is this Great Smoky Mountains.
Right.
Of course it is.
Right.
But it's not the only church.
Right. Yes, and.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. That's good. I'm trying to think. You named a couple of things like a dream. You said something about Abraham.
Oh yeah, no. I was talking about stories. How stories have helped me narrate and navigate touch points throughout my life. And I remember having Abraham when I was going to Vermont, and I was driving. It was probably around 11 o'clock at night, and it was pitch black. And I'm going through the Adirondack Mountains, and I'm kind of on the border of upstate New York and Vermont, and I just check into this Fleabag hotel, and I just keep asking myself, what am I doing? What I have a law degree. I don't know if I passed the bar. Like, what am I doing? Going to Vermont? This is crazy. I should be getting married. I should be, having stability like everybody else. This makes no sense. And that was when the image of Abraham. I still remember exactly where I was. It was just an image of Abraham. God calling Abraham. And I'm not trying to say I'm Abraham.
Yeah.
But I'm connecting with that story.
But it's almost like a vision, though.
It was a vision.
Yeah, which is another language. Right?
God calling Abraham to go out into the world to seek a new place.
Yeah.
So that stayed with me, and
it's funny from the outside hearing it and looking at it. It's like I could almost interpret it as, well, it's really what Bishop Tharp said again. I mean, it's that thing. You would go and do these things and go wander or escape or whatever it is because you had this thing in you that was calling you and wouldn't leave you alone.
It was like a tug.
And you just couldn't. You maybe didn't know it at the time. You didn't know what that was, but this unsettling thing, that wouldn't allow you to settle. Yeah. And so you react to it, or you run from it, or you lash out. You go.
I've often wondered if that's, and this is just, I'm just wondering out loud, but I mean, we have a crisis of mental health, and if one of the pieces, and fortunately in our modern world, we are focusing on the physiological side, which is necessary, and the mental side, which is necessary, but I think the piece that is missing is the spiritual side, and what I do think can be a part of that psychosis is people not following that tug, neglecting wherever that tug is pulling them,
neglecting just even the existence of whatever that is. Right.
No, I agree, and I mean Paulo Coelho, who wrote The Alchemist, he kind of writes about that same thing, and he wrote a marvelous book called Veronica Decides to Die.
That's Carla's favorite author.
Oh yeah, he's amazing. He's amazing. But briefly, the book is about a woman who decides to kill herself, and she takes some pills, but she doesn't take enough to kill herself, and she wakes up, and what they say is, you're going to die, but just not now. Your body is weakened, and so she has to live a week. The suicide is no longer on her terms anymore.
Wow.
And then she interacts with other people in this institution that she's placed in, and kind of that's sort of this thesis is that this existential angst that people feel is oftentimes the absence of God, which is exactly what Augustine said. And it's that tug, it's that pull.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, man, rich stuff. So, what else? Anything else? I mean, you talked about the morning in Georgetown, and that was a big pivotal one. So you named that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess more than anything, it's just the gratitude.
Yeah.
Just so much gratitude, and I think, I mean, that's our job as human beings, is to really, I think God calls us to learn how to love deeply and learn how to learn and grow. For whatever reason, our spirits and souls, we've been sent to earth as resident aliens to learn and grow one way or the other. And so...
Yeah, that's stretching, I call it.
Yeah.
God's always stretching me.
Right. And then when you go down the wrong path, C.S. Lewis is quoting George MacDonald when he says that you can go down a wrong path and you're going to get tied up in a knot, and the knot is just going to get tighter and tighter. The more you try to fight it, it's just going to tighten up the knot. And you can't cut the rope, but what you have to do is you have to figure out, okay, you have to go back and untie that knot. And that's going to be hard sometimes. And I think that's the challenge we have in life, is trying to figure out, okay, am I getting myself in a knot, or is it time for me to untangle the knot and go in a different direction? So I think that's one way I try to look at life, is see, what did I learn in all of this? And but whether you're in a knot, whether you're untangling a knot, whether you're in a tragedy, whether you're in joy, I'm not even going to say I believe, I know that God is in the midst of all of that. All of that.
Yeah, 100%. It occurs to me we could, our conversations, and I sort of feel like this was the same thing with Howard, it's like we could do a whole episode like this just leading up to priesthood, essentially, and then a whole episode from beginning ministry to now. It's like those are two very different chapters. But
yeah, especially when there's such a misunderstanding of what priesthood, even among priests,
right.
At least from our vantage point. Yeah. So,
are there other touch points that you haven't named that you would name?
Oh, there are, but we would be here for another hour or so. I mean, there's a second half to all of this.
Right.
How I got into Knoxville, Tennessee, and but we would be here for a really long time.
Yeah. No, that's fine. So of sort of that first half of life, to use another roar, have you named those stories were probably in the category of your most powerful. Do you have something, anything else in that time frame that you would name as more powerful spiritually? I would say those are pretty. I mean, the Abraham thing and the call, the Georgetown moment. Those are pretty.
Well, I don't want to get into the whole. I'd say probably the most powerful spiritual moment, and one of the most difficult, was an incident that happened later that I haven't talked about. It was when I had to get married, and there was a period in time where I had to get married, and I didn't want to a person. I was a priest at the time, and while the week before the wedding, in my body, I had a disc that was piercing, a bulging disc that was piercing a nerve, and my right arm was becoming paralyzed. So I was in an intense amount, excruciating physical pain, excruciating mental pain, and spiritual pain. And so I think that was, I'd never, there's always been sort of a dull depression kind of just a small, but never a deep, dark depression. And that was probably the only time in my life where I'd really fallen into a very, very deep, dark depression, because it's the perfect storm of physical, mental, and spiritual coming, and just despair.
Yeah.
Prednisone didn't help either.
Yeah.
But it took me to another country that I'd never experienced before, and kind of dipped my toe into a world that I was unfamiliar with. Thankfully, God was in the midst of that. I had a marvelous spiritual director. She told me to read. I can never pronounce her name. Panam Chomra. She's a Buddhist monk. When Things Fall Apart. And again, I was in the doctor's office. So this was a weird. I just thought of this. So I used to read Bible stories as a child, and I would read them in the doctor's office. You know, those little copies of the books. Yeah. And I was in the doctor's office. I had just gotten married, and I was about to go into surgery for my neck. And I saw that copy of Bible stories from when I was a kid.
Wow.
And I picked it up, and I read about the story of creation and of Adam and Eve all over again. And what struck me in that moment was, your life is just something very small, that there's a much grander world in the universe, and that you are just participating in a much larger story that has been happening for thousands of years, and God willing will continue thousands and thousands of years. And this is your world, this is your struggle. And that was a message that was communicated to me. And so reading those Bible stories in a children's book in an office before I was about to get surgery, it was like, that was the spiritual Prozac I needed.
Yeah, well, it occurs to me we can't we don't have time to go into all the second half of things, but like, it just strikes me, because I've never known some components of your story in such detail. I mean, I've known a lot of your story, but like, knowing all that now makes then like all the things that have played out even more recently in your life, like, no, I mean, I'm being serious. Like, it just goes like, oh yeah, of course. Like, of course.
Follows a pattern.
Yeah, like, of course. I mean, like, of course, out of the challenges and struggles, depression, darkness, whatever.
Yeah.
Father's death, like, whatever you want to name, it's the same story. God's there with you, and somehow things like
get reoriented,
happen beautifully, and do
Oh my God!
It's amazing.
Well, I mean, I have an amazing wife now, and I have an amazing son, and stepchildren, and I mean, it just like,
it's crazy.
It's jaw dropping when the despair happens and you lose everything, and then it's jaw dropping when all the goodness comes. It just.
I know. That's like a thread running through your life. That's fascinating.
So.
Cool. Well, anything else? Last chance. Any other?
No, Brett. Thank you for asking me to do this. I was reluctant. I didn't know what to say, but thanks.
I appreciate reluctance at all.
And I appreciate your friendship and just the work you do. Just as a priest, you do great. You do fantastic work. You really do.
Thanks, brother. I feel the feeling's mutual, and I count you as one of my best friends and closest colleagues, and I love you, and you're a blessing.
Well, likewise. And also with you.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, brother.
Bye.